What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the podcast show that I host from a Blanket Fort recording studio in a one-bedroom apartment in North Hollywood. This is People Pleaser. I'm Austin Archer, and today I want to talk about something that right up at the top of the show, I'm going to say I don't have a lot of answers on this topic, and I'm diving right in. Usually I do some primer. I try to tell you about a little bit about what's going on in my life, try to like get you primed, but I got places to be. I have a doctor's appointment I need to get to in like an hour, and I got to get through a lot of stuff on the show, okay? In case you're wondering how horseback riding lessons are going, they're going fine. I'm still going. I'm not getting much better, but I'm still going. But let's get into the show. What I want to say about this topic right at the top is I don't actually know what the actual answer to this question is. The question of the title of the episode. The title of the episode is, how do we determine what is and is not appropriate for children? And what I'm saying right at the top of this topic is I don't know. I'm just going to like poke at some stuff, and some stuff is going to feel maybe more innocuous than other things, and some things are going to feel kind of prickly. Okay, I'll say that right at the top, that we might talk a little bit about like sexual assault or pedophilia or things that just like come with the territory of what we're trying to hopefully prevent kids from having to experience when we're trying to prevent them from having to experience something non-age appropriate. So we might bump up against some prickly topics, and I'm not offering here in this podcast any definitive answers on here's exactly how we determine as a society what is and is not appropriate for kids. But this topic has been on my mind because of the whole debate around drag shows for kids and whether or not it's appropriate for kids to see drag shows or for kids to be present at pride events and things like that. I've talked on this podcast and I've been talking on my channel a lot about how I think that the moral panic and the moral outrage over drag shows with kids and things like Drag Story Hour has much more to do with people just not liking gay people and not liking queer people and queerness and queer culture and being afraid of queer culture rubbing off on their kids than it does with people actually being concerned about their kids not consuming age appropriate content. And I've talked about that in lots of different ways where like if it really was just about their kids being exposed to people dressed in skimpy outfits or doing sexually suggestive dancing, that these same people would have a problem with they would have a problem with cheerleaders at sporting events, or they would have a problem with child beauty pageants, or they would have a problem with just all of the overt sexuality that exists on television and in movies and magazines. And, they would have a problem with the entire city of Las Vegas. I've talked about this a lot on my channel and in the podcast so far. And it does feel like there's a lot of selective outrage in this particular issue, that people are selecting their outrage for an issue that concerns an art form that is most commonly performed by and consumed by and enjoyed by people in the queer community. And it seems like an excuse to vilify people in the queer community and make them the villains of a narrative, while saying that what the real concern is the safety and well-being of kids. And, I've talked about on this podcast and on my channel how I think that it's kind of gross to say that your number one concern is the safety and well-being of kids, but not be super concerned about finding a solution for gun violence in schools. It's kind of gross to say that your number one concern is the safety and well-being of kids, but not be super concerned about sexual assault and abuse in churches. And not be concerned about the fact that kids are just statistically way more likely to be assaulted or abused at church or by someone in their community that they know, someone in their family, usually like straight white men in their family. And I put that in quotes for people in the video because like these are men who are kind of comp het and comp straight, like people who are like have been forced by the society that they live in to present as straight and cisgender, and then they enact their repressed sexuality in all kinds of unhealthy ways. And again, I'm not going to psychoanalyze or get too much into what causes pedophilia or things like that. This is like my armchair analysis, but like I'm just saying this issue over what is and is not appropriate for kids, especially when it comes to drag shows, seems to be laden with double standards, hypocrisy, um, blatant, selective outrage, and it really all feels like a smokescreen to get away with being open about bigotry towards people in the queer community. But it made me think about the question, like, how do we actually determine what is and is not appropriate for our kids to consume? What is and is not appropriate for the eyes and ears of children? What is and is not appropriate to be teaching to kids or for kids to be absorbing? And the more I think about this topic, the more complex it gets, because it seems like the entire topic is just full of places where we have all kinds of double standards, or where we're like imparting things to kids that we don't even fully understand. I'll say right at the top here, before I get into sort of like my list of things that I've been thinking about, that like I'm a guy who my entire life has struggled with rules. I've always struggled with knowing when to follow and when to ignore certain rules. Rules to me, even from the time I was a child, I needed to be able to understand why a certain rule existed, and it needed to be applied in a fair way, in a way that felt fair. If there was ever a rule that an adult was telling me and they couldn't articulate in a way that made sense to me why that rule existed, wear your seatbelt. Why? Not just because I say so, but because we might get in a car accident and you will be safer if you have your seatbelt on, and I don't want you to get hurt. And if you can't articulate that to me clearly, I don't understand why you're telling me to put my seatbelt on, and I will never like hearing because I say so. Because I'm older than you and I know better than you. You know? I've always needed to understand, don't hit that person. Keep your hands to yourself. Why? He was annoying me. Why can't I hit them? Because that's not how we resolve conflicts. And because hitting people can cause real damage to them. It can hurt their feelings and hurt them. And you wouldn't want someone to hurt your feelings, right? You wouldn't want to have that feeling. So don't hit other people. If you don't want other people to hit you, you don't hit other people. You find a better and healthier way to resolve that conflict. I can understand that. And I don't think that a fair application of that rule is because I'll hit you. As an adult, I'll hit you if I see you hitting someone else. I don't think that a fair application of that rule is if you don't want me to hit you, then you don't hit other people. But it is if you don't want to be hit in general. If you can understand the experience of not wanting to be hit, then you should not hit. I always from the time I was a young kid, needed to understand why a rule existed, and I needed to know that it was being applied fairly. I still, to this day as an adult, really struggle with rules that I think are stupid. And our government is loaded with them. There are all kinds of laws and rules that government bureaucrats draw up that are literally just to like milk money out of people. Recently, my car was towed in Los Angeles, outside of a friend's house that I was staying at. And I came out in the morning and my car was gone. Brand new car. I just bought this car and it was gone. My first thought was, oh my God, my car is stolen. Brand new car. They stole it. One of the neighbors came out and said, are you looking for your car? I said, yeah, they went. She went, yeah, they towed it just about an hour ago. And I went, oh my God, why? And she said, there's a construction project happening down the street. I looked down the street. I saw it. I could see them working on it. And it was literally probably 200 to 300 feet away from where I'd parked. It was like on a whole other section of the street. It was like far away. Like the construction area they were small. The construction cars and what was going on was small in my vision because it was that far away. And I could see down where the construction project was happening that there were lots of temporary tow away, no parking signs. And I thought, oh, well, the city messed up. There are no signs where I parked. There were no temporary, no parking, tow away signs where I parked. So I thought, oh, well, I'm going to go get my car back and the city's going to reimburse me because they messed up. So I went in person to the city to say, hey guys, I took photos, I took videos of where I was parked. There were no signs there. You messed up. You need to give me my money back, my $400 back. The guy there at the office that I went into even shows me a photo that his officer who gave me the citation and who had the car towed took of my car, showing there were no signs around my car. You can even see in the photo that he took, you can see the construction project happening all the way down the street, and you can see how far away it's happening from my car. And you can see that all of the signs indicating that it was a temporary no parking zone, tow away zone, were all the way down there. So I go, oh, great, it's right there. The guy goes, yeah, but did you know that LA County in their laws, there is no minimum distance that a temporary no parking tow away zone sign needs to be placed for it to be applicable on that street. The only thing that can cut off, the only place where those signs cut off is if there is an intersecting street. So had there been an intersecting street between you and the construction project, those signs would no longer have been valid. But as long as you are on the same unbroken stretch of street, those signs can be valid for the entire street. Now, in Los Angeles, where I live, there are streets that go for over a mile without being intersected by another street. So hypothetically, you could be parked on one end of that street, and a mile down the street, on the other end of the street, they could be doing a little project where there's no way you could possibly know that an entire mile down the street, that sign applies to you, and they could come and tow your car. So because of a technicality, the city decided not to refund me on that because I didn't know that stupid law that existed. And that's just an example of a rule that I think is really bad and stupid, and that I don't want to follow, and that I don't want to exist. The world that I live in is full of those kinds of rules, and I'm a person who has a problem with rules that can't be articulated well and that are applied in an unfair way. So that's just a little example there. Let's start up at the top with something. So now we're talking about, what is and is not appropriate for kids, and the rules that we have sort of societally. Sometimes these are enforced by law, sometimes they're not, but sometimes it's just sort of like societal law, social law. The first thing I want to talk about is swear words. This is a thing that I've wanted to do like a whole episode on for a long time, just because my whole life I've always thought it was kind of funny. I've never really understood it. I was raised Mormon, and I was raised in a house where we did not swear. And I was raised in a church where you did not swear. Mormons don't swear. And nobody in my community swore. Nobody in my neighborhood swore. Kids swore, and we definitely heard our parents swear from time to time, but it was always agreed upon that, like, you don't snitch on your parents. You don't let other adults know that your parents swear when they're trying to fix the sprinklers. And you don't, but you do tell on other kids when you go like, oh, I was over at Ryan's house and he said the S word. And sometimes if you're a little shitty kid, you will do that. But like, yeah, it was all this like secret stuff, secret bad words that we're not supposed to say. And from the time I was a little kid, I did not understand it. Nobody could articulate to me what the difference between fuck and frick was, or fuck and frig was. And I couldn't get it. I couldn't understand in my head why there was a difference between me saying like funk and being like, this is funkin' dumb, and saying fucking dumb. It seemed so stupid to me as a child, and it still seems stupid to me as an adult, that like there are words that are inappropriate for kids to hear or to say, and that like full on fucking grown ass adults will be like, I don't say those words still. Like when I meet, if you're older than 20 years old and you don't say swear words, I think you're a fucking idiot. I think you're really immature and dumb, and you're still like sticking to a rule that like you should have realized a long time ago was a stupid rule. And that like nobody is like applying fairly, and that nobody can articulate fairly. I did do a little like research on Wikipedia. Ever heard of it? I looked at like different websites, but then I just was like, Wikipedia has like the easiest thing to sort of track the etymology of like where profanity comes from. And I had my suspicions. I was like, without even researching, where would I think the idea that there are certain words that you can't say would come from? And I would think that it has roots in religion, and maybe like being taught that there is a way to speak that makes you closer to God. At least that's how it was taught to me. The way that it was articulated to me by the adults in my community when I did have a problem with like, why can't I say certain words, was like, there are certain words that don't invite the Holy Spirit. There are certain words that don't allow you to be reverent and to be a vessel for the Holy Spirit to be present. So there's certain kind of language that you use that God does not like. Again, like, and I was like, fine, as a little kid, like, fine, I don't want to offend God and I don't want to send the Holy Spirit away. But like, you're telling me that the omnipotent creator of the universe, who has more knowledge than is even conceivable, who possesses more knowledge than the entirety of all of human knowledge for the entire history of mankind. Like, this being knows more about the inner workings of the universe than you could possibly even conceive of in your little pea brain human mind. And this being's also like, I don't like it when people cuss. This being's like, please don't say shit. If you could please say shiz instead, I would feel much more comfortable being here. If you if you could say heck instead of hell, that would make me feel more comfortable. But like, that would be my guess. Without even researching, I would guess it has some roots in some dumb like religion thing. But that's apparently true. I'm going to read to you just what Wikipedia said and like take it with a grain of salt, and you can do your own research if you want. Wikipedia said the term profane originates from classical Latin. Profanus, it's spelled with anus on the end of it. I like that. Profanus. I've got a pain in my profanus. Literally means before, or in parentheses, outside the temple. Pro meaning outside, and fanum meaning temple or sanctuary. The term profane carried the meaning of either desecrating what is holy or with a secular purpose as early as the 1450s. So this is sort of what I suspected, is that like, this was religion creating a stranglehold over certain words to say that like, there are certain words that make you closer to God and certain words that make you further away from God. And then of course this all bled into social classism, where it was like, a person who is secular, a person who is removed from God and shows that they are, with the language that they use and with their willingness to profane and to use profane language and to use cuss words and curse words, that person is showing that they are of a lower class. This becomes like, if you are of a higher class and of a higher status, you would speak in a more godly way. You would speak in a way that is closer to God. Again, a silly God who is capable of creating and destroying life and matter and planets, but somehow thinks that the word like, asshole is like icky. but yeah. So this is one of those things that, again, I don't know at what age it's appropriate for a kid to start saying swear words or hearing swear words. I just know that like, I was hearing swear words pretty much my whole life, even from adults who were like not supposed to be saying them. I was hearing them on TV. I was hearing other kids say them. And it was like this secret thing for a very long time, for longer than I would have liked it to be. Even until I was like in my mid-20s, I didn't swear around my family. I didn't swear around the adult members of my family because I didn't want to upset them. And it was only in the last like 5-6 years that I started being like, fuck it. If you guys want to be around me, you're going to have to like grow up about this a little bit. I won't swear around your kids, but like, you need to be adults when you hang out with me and deal with the fact that all of you swear. And I've heard all of you swear. I've heard swear words come out of all of your mouths. So zip your fucking self-righteous lip and grow up. and grow up and admit that like, we all swear, and that like, your kids swear too, and you've told your kids not to swear before, and that's weird. That's a thing where like, no one can accurately describe to me why kids shouldn't be swearing, so I have a problem with it. What I can get on board with when it comes to bad words and which words people shouldn't say are slurs and words that are offensive and harmful to marginalized people and communities. That's a rule that can be described to me and explained to me in a way where I can go, oh, I get that. I get how when I use the N slur, I am wielding historic systemic power and calling back to historic systemic racial power and saying, I'm going to use this word knowing that this word was used to subjugate and create a lower social class of person for this group of people. And I'm going to wield this word in a way to draw up that pain and that harm. I don't need to use that word. That word has no practical usage for me in day-to-day life outside of being harmful or just being sort of shitheaded, like being just kind of an idiot. I don't need to use that word. I don't need to use pretty much any slur, the R slur, the F slur. I don't need to use ableist language or language that is actively harmful or dehumanizing or degrading to intersections of people and subsections of people that are already historically marginalized and that already deal with a great deal of societal marginalization. I don't need to add to the social difficulty of being a person who uh, lives life as a disabled person or lives life with a learning disability. I don't need to add to that struggle with my ignorant language. So that's a rule I can understand, and that's a rule that, like, I also have no problem, like, when someone does use the R slur, whenever someone, in the comments of one of my videos says, like, "This guy's so," and they say the R word, I instantly am like, "Yeah, you're telling me something about yourself. You're telling me something about yourself, that you're careless and reckless with your language in a way that says you don't care about doing harm to other people with your language." Now, you could make the same argument that, like, people who are religious might feel harmed by me saying the F word. Again, I go into, like, but we need to go into why. Where did they learn that me saying the F word is bad? Even though it's a word that, like, I know they've heard before, and I know that, like, they've probably said before, and that people in their family have said before. The pastor at their church has probably said that word before. So, like, where did you hear that that word was bad, and how is that word doing harm to you? Does that word have some sort of historic systemic power over you? Is it a word that was used to subjugate you in some way and you reclaimed it after years of effort, and now you would like to keep it for your own and keep it from the people who are using it to oppress you? No? Is it just something that somebody at church told you was a bad word, and that if it offends God, and now that I have a hard time respecting that rule. And just like I said at the beginning, like, that's a hard rule for me to get down with. Let's keep moving. We got more of these to move through. I think that makes sense on words. I still don't have an answer of how we adequately determine when it's okay for kids to use certain words. I do think that a lot of this goes down to parents. Like, parents need to be better at being honest with their kids and talking to their kids about, like, why this language might be harmful or why this language might not be suitable for this environment. So even if you live in a household where you're okay with your kids swearing from time to time, you might tell them, "Hey, if you do that at school, or if you do that when we're out to dinner with friends and family, they might not be as understanding of it as we might, and they might treat you different after that." And, like, giving it to them in a way where that maybe they can understand, like, "Oh, there might be a social consequence to me using that language." I don't know. Drugs and alcohol. This is a thing. I'm a sober guy. I'm 4.5 years sober. Um, I was raised again in a community where Mormons don't drink. They don't use drugs. So it's really weird when I go to meetings and everyone's like, "Oh, everybody in my family was an alcoholic. It was alcoholics all the way down." And I'm like, nobody in my neighborhood drank. I think there were probably like 2 houses on my block, on my street, that had booze in the house. And so it was a dry neighborhood. It was a dry church that I went to. And um here's a rule too that I can understand. This is a rule around, like, maybe it's not appropriate for kids of a certain age to use drugs or to drink. I'm like, yeah, I get it. I meet people all the time in Alcoholics Anonymous who are like, my first drink was when I was 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old. I first smoked weed when I was 11. I meet these people all the time. And I will say that even though they typically have a lot of wreckage in their past, because that's sort of just a key marker of people who are in recovery programs, they still are, like, reasonably well-adjusted adults. So I hear all these arguments about, like, what it does to the stunting of the growth of the brain and all this stuff. But I talk to these people, I'm like, yeah, you seem like a person who's capable of communicating. Like, not that you haven't had your fair share of troubles. Again, you wouldn't be here if you hadn't. And again, I'm not saying that, like, no, we should just let kids do drugs and drink. I get why. And I think that it can be explained to kids why in a way that makes sense. I think we can articulate, hey, you might not be ready to deal with the consequences of these choices. You just might not be ready to deal with a download that's going to come from a psilocybin trip or an LSD trip. You might have a lot of fun with your friends and you might see some wacky stuff, but you might not be intellectually or spiritually mature enough to like take in that download of information that's going to come from that psychedelic trip. And that for a lot of kids could feel condescending. That could feel like you're talking down to them or like you're looking down on them. And I totally get that too. And that could be a hard thing for a lot of kids to swallow. Again, I think this goes back to like being honest with kids. I think too often kids are just told like drinking and drugs make you a bad person. I think too often kids are told by their families and by their communities and by their churches, drinking and using drugs makes you bad. It makes you immoral. Don't do it, or you will lose favor with God and with this community. You will lose favor with your family. Again, that's a hard thing for someone like me to swallow, because then I go like, well, why do these things exist at all? Marijuana is a plant. It grows in the ground. Why do you put water on soil on that seed and it grows into that thing if it's like evil? If it's just an evil thing that's going to make me an evil person? I need to be able to have a conversation with someone who can explain to me that's going to do things to your brain and to your perception of the world that maybe you can and should experience someday, but maybe not now. Maybe just not now, you know? Maybe just be a kid for a while. It's like I'm learning how to ride horses right now, right? I'm learning how to ride horses and like it's one layer at a time. And I'm a toddler on this thing. It's like the second I start going faster on this horse, my brain fries and I freak out and I don't know where I am and I lose my feet and I lose my sense of direction. I need to walk and practice steering and stop and start over every time I do it wrong. Every time I pull the reins back too far and the horse stops, I need to try it again and walk and practice steering without pulling the reins back so he doesn't stop and he continues moving forward. Give him a little tap with the leg that I want him to turn in that direction. I need to practice these things one teeny little layer at a time. So my instructor's not saying, you will never run, you will never trot, you will never advance in speed or skill. Just saying, maybe not now. Maybe today's not the day to put you in that Ferrari and have you gun it. Maybe not now. Maybe let's just have you practice driving around a parking lot first. And I think that's sort of a good way to explain to kids and to teenagers, like, you're probably gonna have some experiences with drugs and alcohol in your life. Just maybe not now, you know? And I do think that a lot of my friends that came from households and families where their parents were like, listen, would you like to try a little wine tonight at dinner? Would you like to try what it tastes like and just to satiate that curiosity? And then having honest conversations with their kids about like what being drunk is like and what being stoned is like and what being like talking to your kids and having an open environment for that and letting them know like, hey, if you do go out and party in high school and you go to a party and you get fucked up, please call me. Don't drive home. Just know that you can call me. And I would so much rather come pick you up and kind of look at you and be like, you're a fucking idiot. You know, I would so much rather have that interaction than getting a call from the police that you're dead or seriously injured or hurt someone else seriously because you were driving drunk, you know? And again, I don't actually know where the cutoff is when someone might be ready because people mature at different levels. I thought it was interesting. I looked up when we adopted the legal drinking age to be 21. You might be surprised. Think in your head right now without looking it up, and some of you might know the answer, but just think how long has the national, and this is in America, the United States of America, how long has the national minimum age of drinking been 21 years old? You think maybe it goes back to like the 30s or the 50s, like after Prohibition, we were like, okay, we'll bring back alcohol, but we'll set an age limit at it. 1984. 1984, Congress passed the minimum drinking age, something, what is it? Congress established that the drinking age was the Minimum Legal Drinking Act, MLDA, 1984. Before then, different states had different rules, going as low as 16 years old going up to 17, 18, 19, and 20 and 21 in different states. But it wasn't nationally adopted as 21 until 1984. It's fairly recent. That's 4 years before I was born. It's just been ubiquitous my whole life that like that's the age that a person can drink. How weird though that like we let people enroll in the military at 18. We let people drive cars on freeways, which is a massively dangerous thing to do at 16 years old. And it's a whole 5 more years before we say you're legally allowed to go and buy spirits and try alcohol. Knowing that a lot of 16-year-olds are drinking anyway, are doing drugs anyway. We say you're not legally allowed till you're 21, but you can go and fight and die in a war 3 years before you can drink. Again, I'm not saying that like we should say that it's totally fine for kids of any age to engage in this stuff. I'm just saying like when we get into the conversation about what is and what is not appropriate for kids, it gets real dicey real quick because a lot of these rules feel pretty arbitrary and feel like we're not being realistic. Like we're not dealing with the reality that teenagers and kids are finding and using drugs and alcohol. We're just sort of treating it like this, like, the kids won't stop doing this thing. And it's like, well, what if we just sort of like dealt with it in a more realistic way? I don't know that this is the solution. I'm spitballing here off the top of the dome. I don't know that the way to do it is just to say, nope. And for certain things, nope, at all. Like you're never going to get to try that thing. Why? It's bad. Why? Because I said so. Surely there's a better way for us to approach some of this stuff, right? And again, I'm not saying that like drugs and alcohol are good for kids. I really feel like I need to like drive this home while having this conversation because I feel like in the conversations that I've been having like this on my social media, the second that I sort of say, okay, but why don't you guys care about this or that, or try to point out some of the double standards of the hypocrisy, people are like, so you don't think that we should be trying to protect kids at all? You just think that anything goes for kids? And it's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that a lot of our rules around what is and is not appropriate for kids seem to be very selective and seem to be hard to articulate and seem to have roots in things that aren't very logical or reasonable. Movies and TV shows and magazines. That's the next thing. Movies and TV shows and magazines. We have rating systems, right? Rated R, PG-13, NC-17. You can't go in if you're not 17. PG and G. Letting parents and families and kids know, sort of a grading scale of like what might be on your level, what might be appropriate for you. I grew up with lots of friends whose families wouldn't let them see anything above PG-13. So PG-13 was off limits, rated R was off limits, NC-17 was definitely off limits, and X, that bad boy was off limits. I grew up in a household where there were certain movies my parents didn't want me to see. If there was sex in the movie, if my parents knew that there were titties in the movie and there was like a pretty good sex scene in it, if they went and saw it and they knew that tits were out and that I might see some writhing and some humping, they were usually like, you don't need to see that movie. But there were certain rated R movies that they were like, you should see that. You should see Saving Private Ryan. I saw that young. I saw that probably 14 years old. No, that movie came out in 1998. It was 10, 11. I saw it like a year after it came out. It's like 11 years old. Very violent movie. I enjoyed it. I got it. I was affected by it. I had an emotional experience with it. I watched the movie Good Will Hunting in theaters when I was about 9 years old. My mom wanted me to see it because she knew that I wanted to be an actor and she wanted me to see the acting. She was so impressed by the acting in that movie. She wanted me to go see it. That movie says the F word probably 500 times. Conservatively, they say fuck 500 times in that movie. And all different kinds of adult situations are described and portrayed. There's fighting, there's drug use and alcohol use, there's underage drug use and alcohol use, abuse. It's heavy. It's still to this day one of my favorite movies. I didn't grow up and like look at that movie and like, oh my God, that movie traumatized me as a kid. It messed me up. And again, I'm not what was good for me or right for me or fair for me or good for my family might not be good or fair or right for your family. I do actually believe that it's fine to leave a lot of this up to individual families. I do think it's fine for families to say, we're not going to have our kids watching that show in our house. That's fine. That's totally fine. I think it's a little weird that Republicans will go to that argument. They'll be like, we should like teachers should not be teaching about this stuff in classrooms. Parents should be teaching about this stuff. But then we'll also say the government should step in and determine that kids definitely should not be allowed to see drag queens, and drag just should be banned in general. It should just be banned. Absolutely all the way banned, completely stripping parents of their ability to say, we're okay with our kids seeing drag queens. In this household, we don't think that our kids are going to be adversely affected by seeing drag queens. So I do think that double standard is interesting too. But I agree that I'm totally fine leaving it up to parents. But I will say that like when people try to make this attempt to shield their kids from non-age appropriate content in movies, magazines, TV shows, it just doesn't feel very realistic to me. It feels kind of like, who are you kidding? Like, are you being serious? Have you ever taken your kids to a football game or a basketball game and had them see the dancers and the cheerleaders that are there? Have you ever just taken your kids outside of the house? There are billboards that are sexually suggestive with people taking their clothes off. There are billboards for condoms and things like that. There are kids being raised in the city of Las Vegas. That's their hometown. That's where they grow up, is a town where there are just leaflets for call girls on the streets, littering the streets of just naked women. They're like, I just think that when parents say in our household, we're going to try our best to shield our kids from sexually explicit or sexually suggestive imagery, I'm like, yeah, maybe you can be like, you can effectively put the fear of God into your kid that they don't want to get caught looking at something with you around. But like the idea that you can actually effectively protect your kid from ever seeing something sexually suggestive, I don't think it's realistic. And it's not just in this modern age. There's a lot of people that I see in the comments that'll be like, it's really getting out of hand these days. Lately, the overt sexualization of everything is really getting out of hand. And that's just not true. That's not accurate. It's not a recent development. This has been the case my entire life. I was born in 1988. It was on TV my entire life. Even if I was just channel surfing or in commercials, Herbal Essences commercials where people are having full-on orgasms while they're washing their hair, the shampoo is giving them a full-on O. And maybe I don't necessarily understand what that is as a kid, but I get that there's something going on, that she's getting tingly down in her nether regions because that Herbal Essences is so friggin' sexy. Baywatch was like the #1 show on TV when I was a kid, little kid. And it didn't start in the 80s either. The 60s and the 70s both had their own sexual revolution movements. Playboy magazine, I just released a video that I was really proud of the research on, and I did this whole list, but I'm going to do it again on the podcast. Playboy magazine was first published in 1953. 1953, okay? Now, a lot of people could go, yeah, but Playboy magazine is for adults. You keep that away from kids. And they sell it where? Eye level with children at every corner store in America. I grew up literally going to 7-Elevens and pulling out Maxim magazine and looking at things that I wasn't supposed to be looking at and doing a quick flip through of like the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. You know, like this was normal. I could see it. I could even just sneak. All I needed as a little horny kid was a quick sneaky peek. All I needed to satiate me for like a full day was just a quick sneaky peek at the cover of a Maxim magazine as my mom is walking me by in the store. And I would take a quick sneaky peek. I was a little horn dog as a little kid. I got horny fast, you guys. Okay. And I used to feel extreme shame about that. And I don't anymore, because the more adults that I talk to about this stuff, the more adults are like, oh yeah, I was doing like weird little horn dog shit as a kid. So like this idea that when a parent is like, we are going to do our best to make sure our kid doesn't see any of this stuff before they're ready at an appropriate age, I think all it does is it just tells their kid that like they got to be good at hiding that shit and they better not get caught. They never better get caught taking a sneaky peek because it's everywhere. I was going to keep going with my list. Playboy magazine first published in 1953. Yeah, you have to be an adult to purchase it, but also you could just be like a kid who tucks one in the back of his pants and runs out of the store. It's not like it's sold in a store that you need to have an ID to get into. The first porno ever made was El Satario. This is what they think. It was one of the first pornos they could ever find. It's came out of Argentina, and it was one of the first examples they could find of up close shots on camera of human genitalia, of penetration, things going in and out, fluids, things like that. Renaissance paintings. We're going back now. Back when the church had people dressing all the way buttoned up with a big collar and 50 layers of clothing on, they were painting everybody naked, dude. Everybody was naked. And it wasn't just the heathen secular art consumers and artists that were painting people naked. For centuries now, churches have been littered with imagery of nude bodies. For centuries, every classical portrait of Adam and Eve was just two super sexy naked people. You're telling me that Jesus on the cross isn't intentionally made sexy in some churches? That you don't go to some churches and you're like, you're making that guy fucking like he can get it. You're giving him full on cum gutters. You're making him sexy. Okay. Even up there on that cross, which by the way is very brutal, like violent imagery, just imagery of someone of like a really jacked, yoked, sexy guy being brutally, violently tortured in front of kids. And that's okay somehow. Church, like the Sistine Chapel, one of the foremost like examples of high art in the world, is just naked bodies all over the place and naked children. Angels are depicted as just like little naked babies. So this idea that like modern society is out of control with the overt sexualization of everything is just bullshit. The Kama Sutra goes back to the year 320. There are cave drawings depicting sex, gay sex, group sex, intersex people, transgender people, believe it or not. Going back 37,000 years, we have cave drawings of this shit. You're telling me in all that history, thousands and thousands and thousands of years of history, people always were successful at shielding that from the innocent eyes of children? And it's only in this really, really corrupt secular modern age that we're letting our guard down and we're letting our kids see too much stuff? I'm not arguing here that like I'm well adjusted because of my exposure to overt sexualized imagery. I'm not arguing that overt sexualized imagery in the view of children is good or bad. I'm just saying that it is. It is the reality of the world we live in. And when you get selectively upset about drag shows, but about none of the other overt sexualized imagery, you're tipping your hand on your bigotry and your internalized homophobia. This next section, I gave a trigger warning at the beginning of the conversation, but I'm going to reiterate this trigger warning. This next section that I want to talk about includes trigger warnings for sexual assault and pedophilia. Obviously, I'm going to state unequivocally, pedophilia and sexual assault are not okay. I said at the beginning when I talked about kids, like rules that are easy for kids to understand. Consent. Don't touch people without their consent. You don't get touched by anyone without your consent. Explaining why that is to them. Explaining why that's important. It's not okay to do something to someone without their consent. It's not okay for an adult to take advantage of the innocence of a child in that way. So the little trigger warning about this. We're talking about sex. This is probably the biggest thing that I think is tied into all of this stuff. I really think one of the biggest fears that parents and adults have when it comes to determining age-appropriate content or material or topics for kids, the biggest thing is sex. So one of the biggest triggers for people when they hear that, a teacher at school is teaching the kids about what it means to be bisexual or gay is they instantly associate that with sex. And they think that somehow sex and sexuality is being taught at school, even though they don't instantly associate, a prince kissing a princess in a fairy tale with sex or sexuality, because that to them is just sort of default and normal. But I think that most of this stuff comes back to trying to protect our kids from sex before they're ready. And again, not saying that it's okay or anything like that, but I just sort of go like, good luck if that's your goal. If your goal is to try to shield your kid from experiencing any sexuality before like the age of 18, good fucking luck. For most people, It just happens. For most of us, it just happens whether we want it to or not. And that's the section where I'm like, yeah, sexual assault happens to kids. Kids are the victims of pedophilia, and sexual assault happens between kids, where one kid is touching a kid in a way that they don't want to be touched. This is why I think consent conversations are what is key, not just teaching kids that sex is bad. Because what you teach a kid when you teach them that sex is bad is you teach them that if they are the victim of being touched by someone without their consent, they have, whether they wanted to or not, participated in something that is bad, in something that makes them bad. When you attach the topic of sex to shame, to just this is a bad thing that you should not be doing. And there is going to come a point in your life where we're going to talk to you about it more and where it might be okay in a certain context. But if you do it outside of that context, or if you do it before we have a chance to talk to you about it, that's bad. And when you make that thing bad, and just even seeing that thing, I don't want you seeing that thing. I heard that there's a sex scene in that movie. I don't want you seeing it. When you constantly associate this thing, sex, with sex equals bad, what you're telling that kid without meaning to is, if that happens to you, if you find yourself in a situation where you do have a sexual incident, you're bad, whether you wanted it to happen or not. And also, I want to talk about like what happens when a kid gives consent, or two kids with each other. I know people have had that experience where, like, as young, curious, horned up little weirdos, they went to their friend and said, "What would happen if we kissed each other with our tongues? I saw someone doing that on TV. What would happen?" And then the other one goes, I don't know. Do you want to try it?" And they go, "Yeah, I kind of do want to try it." And then they try it. That I had an experience like that as a kid, where me and a friend were being horned up little weirdos who had crushes on girls in class. And I said, "What if you pretend to be so-and-so?" And he said, "Okay, but if I do that, then you have to pretend to be my crush after that." And we said, "Okay." We kiss each other, and we got caught by our parents doing that. And all I knew as a little kid was that I was no longer allowed to hang out with that kid anymore. Nobody ever talked to me about why. I just knew that his mom caught us kissing one day, pretending that the other person was our crush in class, and we were no longer allowed to hang out. And all I knew my whole life growing up was that I had done something bad. I had engaged in something bad that made me a bad person, that I had deep, deep shame about. And it wasn't until I was an adult and I started sharing that experience with other adults, kind of like testing the waters, like, how big of a weirdo does this make me? Do you guys think this is weird if I tell you this story? That I found out how common that story is. That I found out how common it is for kids to discover sexuality in that way, just by being just curious little animals. Just curious little animals with baked in impulses. They discover it in that way that's actually just kind of innocent and fine, but we're just bludgeoning them over the head with, like, if that happens, that equals bad, and that equals shame, and that equals secrecy and hiding and hurting and feeling less than. So kind of with consent or without consent, we're creating this shame narrative around this thing that I don't think could possibly be healthy for kids. And again, I have to reiterate that I'm not saying we should just start watching porn with kids and being like, this is what banging is, and we should start just letting kids hook up in a supervised environment. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that there's like no such thing as age appropriateness or age inappropriateness. I'm just saying I'm not sure about the ways that we've determined that over the years. I'm not sure about the methods that we've used to enforce our rules around some of these guidelines for kids. I just wonder about the efficacy. Does it really work to just try to shield kids from some of this stuff at all costs in any context, knowing that it's a losing battle and that they're going to find out about it? I wonder, would it be more effective to try to foster an environment where your kid feels more comfortable talking to you about things that they're curious about? I don't know. I'm not a parent. I'm sure that these topics are very difficult for parents to navigate. And I'm sure that were I a parent, I might run into some of these issues and go, I'm not sure what to do in this situation. As a single person, I'm telling you on this podcast, I don't know. I don't know. That's where I'm at with that. Food for thought on the topic of how we determine what is and is not appropriate for kids. What do you think? I've got maybe 5 minutes to do some audience feedback. Sorry, I talked a little longer than I meant to. Then I got to go to my doctor's appointment, but let's do some feedback. Patrick Kennedy on YouTube says, and it makes people less likely to tell people if something bad happens to them. That's another good point. So not only does associating sex with shame mean that if something happens to a child that is non-consensual, if they are assaulted in a way or abused in some way, they will feel bad about themselves and feel like they did something bad and feel shame themselves. But it also means that they will be less likely to come forward about what happened. And usually it will come forward years and years and years later in therapy or something, you know, it'll be this repressed thing that they carry on, kind of like my situation, my consensual situation that happened with my friend where we were just two little horned up weirdos. And we had this consensual situation, but it got repressed for years and years and years. For years and years and years, I carried around. I thought, I can't tell anyone about this because they will think I'm an awful person. But yeah, Patrick's right. It makes people less likely to want to speak up. 3N on or entry I don't know how to read your screen name on TikTok says, just love it when a kid asks, why is the sky blue? Why is the dirt brown? Enjoy the whys. Yeah, and I think fostering an environment where you're letting your kid ask questions. I remember when I was in like second grade, one of my friends was dead set that you did not have to have sex to have kids. We didn't really know what sex was, but we knew that it was something bad and something that adults do and something that like we vaguely could see in certain TV shows that we had watched and certain movies that we had watched. We knew that it had something to do with kissing and something to do with like kind of the way that we felt about certain girls at school or boys at school or whatever. We were having those feelings, but we didn't really understand the biological process or like what penetrative sex was versus like oral sex. We didn't know the ins and outs, but I had a friend swearing to me that sex was not necessary to have a baby. And the reason why he was swearing that to me is because his parents had him and he knew sex was bad. And he was saying there's no way that his parents, who are good people, had sex to have him. And the very little I knew about sex, I knew on some level that he was wrong. So we were having this big argument. I went home. I asked my parents, hey, so-and-so is saying that you don't have to have sex to have babies. Is that true? And luckily my mom at the time told me. She said, that's wrong. You do have to do it. She goes, would you like me to explain to you how it works? And I said, I don't think so, but you are sure that you have to do it in order to have a kid. And she said, yes, I'm sure. So, yeah, fostering an environment where question asking can happen. I want to be clear too, like that whole situation that happened with my friend, I'm not like, my parents really fucked that up. They really bungled that. I get that dealing with these situations with kids is difficult, and that my parents were coming from a society and a culture that made them probably feel a little bit scared and shameful about catching their kid doing this thing with his little classmate and being like, oh no, what does that mean? We don't know what to do with that. Maybe if we just separate the two and we just don't talk about it, it'll go away. I understand that my parents were probably scared in that situation and confused and not sure of how to approach it. So it's not like a thing where I'm like, they really fucked up. They really dropped the ball there. Because my parents actually did foster a pretty good environment. Like I said, they were showing me movies that they thought I should see. They were letting me ask questions about those movies. They were having mature conversations with me from an early age. Stinky Link on TikTok says, kids are such cringy weirdos. It's so normal. We all were. It shouldn't be a crisis. And I think if I could say anything to parents listening who have young kids right now, who have infants or toddlers that are growing into younger kids that are going to be going into school, it's like, I just would say, if something like this happens and and obviously I don't actually think that true consent can exist between two children because they don't fully know what goes into it. But if two kids are getting together and they go like, I'll kiss you if I'll kiss the back of your neck if you kiss the back of my neck, and then like kissing the back of necks progresses to like lifting up shirts and kissing the back of backs, and you come downstairs and like the kids have their shirts off and they're kissing each other's backs or doing something weird that kids would do. What I would hope I could say to you is like, don't freak out. It's not a crisis. They're just being little weirdos. They're just being little horned up weirdos. They're just doing a thing that like lots of kids do. Obviously, it's a different situation. If you find your kid with a babysitter who's 6 years older than them and something like that's happening, or you find your kid a kid with an adult, that's obviously a different situation. I still think a conversation should happen, but don't make it a crisis. Don't make it, oh no, what are we as a family going to do about this code red moment? Fern Love Bond on YouTube says, you can develop guidance with some clear values and boundaries like you do with anything. Make it age appropriate, keep the values clear, and listen to the kid about their own comfort with the info. I hear what you're saying here. Again, I would go back to the thing of how do you determine what is age appropriate? And I am okay with leaving that up to parents. That different households might have different time. Like one household might say, I've noticed that my kid is getting at 13 years old, is getting pretty interested every time I pour a beer. I'm going to, as the adult, let my kid sip my beer and talk to him about beer at 13. Another household might say, I'm not going to even broach that subject until my kid is at least 16 or 17. I think that's okay for different parents to navigate that differently. But I do ask the question, like, as society, how do we determine what is and is not age appropriate? We got people with this drag show issue full on saying that like drag shows aren't appropriate for teenagers. And I'm like, do you know teenagers? Do you know how horny teenagers are? By the way, I didn't even say this in this episode, and I really should have said this. I've said it a lot in my content lately. There is nothing overtly sexual about drag. I really need to put that out there. There is nothing overtly sexual about drag. It is being sexualized by people who kind of get the ick from anything that has to do with queer culture. There are certain drag shows and elements of drag that can be sexualized. They're usually occurring at shows that are happening at 21 and older venues. They're most likely not happening at Drag Story Hour. But like this idea that a drag show is the equivalent of taking your kid to like the strip club. It's like, first of all, you clearly don't know what goes into putting on a drag outfit. Most of those ladies are wearing 9 to 10 layers of Spanx and tights and then shoving styrofoam down their thighs to create a fake cartoonish silhouette of a woman. And then they're wearing an outfit that is like layers on layers with layers on layers of makeup on top of that. They're not stripping, you know? Britnip Blue Speck says, there are trans kids in my son's, on TikTok says, there are trans kids in my son's freshman class. Quit acting like they are oblivious. They are smart. So this is the last comment that I'll address because I'm out of time, but it's exactly this. This is what I mean is like when you try as an adult to push to design society in a way where you're shielding kids from things that you don't think they're ready to see or to hear, or that you don't think they're mature enough for. I just think you're kind of being a little unrealistic and not very serious. I just don't take you very seriously when you're doing that because you don't seem to understand that whether you like it or not, kids are being exposed to this stuff. And you can't really legislate it out of society. You can't really bake it out of the cake. They go to school with gay kids and bisexual kids and transgender kids. Now, there are a lot of parents that are like, that's why I homeschool. But again, it's like, how much are like, you know how many fucking homeschool kids I've heard be like, yeah, I hooked up with my sister when I was a little kid because she was the only girl at my, like you cannot protect your kids 100% from being exposed to things that you don't want them to be exposed to. The best thing that you can do is just assume that they're going to know on some level about this stuff that you don't want them to know about and foster an environment where they feel comfortable talking to you. I'm speaking at the end here a little bit like I'm giving advice, and, you know, take my advice with a grain of salt. I don't have kids. I don't know if I'm ever going to have kids. As I said before, I don't know what the answer to this situation is. I just think that the whole topic is really interesting. How do we determine what is appropriate for our kids to see and what isn't? And I don't know that we're like knocking it out of the park. I definitely don't think that going on a crusade of selective outrage over drag shows is any kind of answer. I think that it sort of exposes that you're not really serious about protecting kids, if anything. Because if the only thing you care about is drag shows, then I'm like, cool, why don't you care about gun violence? Why don't you care about sexual abuse in churches? Why don't you care? Like, the list goes on and on and on. Thanks for the comments. Thank you for listening. I'm out of time. I got to go to this doctor's appointment. People Pleaser is written, edited, hosted, and produced by me, Austin Archer, with original theme music also by me. You can find more of my music by going to austin-archer.com or by going to austinarchermusic.bandcamp.com, looking me up on Spotify or Apple Music. I got music everywhere, baby. There's lots of good stuff out there. Patreon.com/Austin Archer. Shout out to the Patreon patrons and everybody new and everybody who's the OGs. Thank you so much for your monthly support. It really, really means the world to me. If you're out there and you would like to support this show, this podcast, the content that I make online, this weird life that I have, patreon.com/Austin Archer. I'd love to have you there. I'd love to have your support. Thank you so much again for listening and for the comments. I'll see you later. I love you so much. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Bye-bye.